Chapter 62, Admissions. Any lawyer worth their salt knows admissions against interest are the best evidence of truth in a sworn statement. In other words, you say something that makes yourself look bad. They are called self-condemnation principles by shrinks and the addiction pros, meaning you can rely on this type of admission as the most accurate information available about any person because there is nothing to gain by saying the bad words against yourself with everything to lose. Ergo, you can believe what is asserted, and that's why courts rely on it. In that spirit, first and foremost, I am not a psychic. I never have been, and I never will be. I am not any type of spiritual impersonator. I am not a spiritual advisor. I am not a pusher or a salesman for God. I am not a missionary, and I'm not on a mission. I'm just telling you about my own personal journey in Africa. I tell the whole truth, okay? So please view the next part of this story with patience and try to understand that I was totally rejected by everyone I ever knew in America. And I do not want to talk about it. But just for you, my own warrior friends, and we're friends by now, here's a review. Where can I possibly begin? Back in the old days, I was training hard for the Nationals in U.S. Judo. I was attacked from the side by a heavyweight training partner in our dojo in Ocean City, New Jersey, under Sensei Dick Walters. My knee snapped loudly and it was broken. I hobbled. It did not hold up very well. I fell. Dick turned white as a sheet and ordered me off the mat and to a medical facility. I was reluctant. I would miss training and I would miss the contest. I said I was okay because it only wobbled like a noodle from the knee down. I could fight one-legged. He didn't smile. He knew I was serious. 2 weeks later, after being wrapped in a black rubber bicycle tire so I could go to work, and I was carried by a stretcher, by the way, and judo practice, I almost lost it from gangrene. I had an emergency operation. A doctor named Axe, Dr. Axe, would you believe that, fixed it and told me I would never be able to fight again, but I would be lucky to walk normal, and I was going to recover home in my backyard. When I saw this old lady neighbor of mine peeking out at me from behind a curtain next door. As I was hopping around the yard with large stones in both hands, trying to hop up steps on my bad leg, and just trying to get my balance back. That was my first actual memory of Jane, my wonderful next-door neighbor. I waved to her every day and she watched my pain through her back window, clapping her hands like a high school cheerleader every time I made it up a step. And I improved every day by showing off for her. Eventually, I went back to training in Ocean City, New Jersey, and trained with a leg brace on. I won the Nationals. And after the award ceremony, I compulsively drove home to Delaware from Pittsburgh all night in driving rainstorms to arrive early a.m. at her doorstep. I proudly brought my first place trophy straight into her. Not to my wife, not to my kids, not for me, but for her. And she kept it proudly on her mantle. Eventually I got to meet her 96-year-old father a month later. He died. I was the last to see him alive. I visited St. Francis Hospital to say goodbye. He grabbed my hand, he looked me in the eyes, and he said, "Take care of Jen." I said, a sacred, "Yes, I will." And he died in front of me. Never say a sacred yes unless you truly mean it. I started visiting her for a while to say hello, then started sitting and talking. She was in a wheelchair most of her 75-something life. She had polio at age 13. After an early iron lung experience and trips to Warm Springs at the same time as President Roosevelt, and a life of constant physical therapy, she could actually wheel herself around. Her dad took care of the home maintenance, food, and other details. She slept on the couch in the front living room and could wrestle herself up onto it from the wheelchair with no help whatsoever. He always called her Jen. She was Jane to me and to everyone else. She now had to take care of all her own personal details and did quite well living on her own. I grew to admire her just for that reason, and we became chess friends. Then one day, a guy named Elwood Babbitt, a very close friend of mine, one of the best channels in America, a real, honest-to-goodness psychic, and very famous, called me. "Hey, Marine, get the book, Many Lives, Many Masters," and he hung up. He was my mentor for a strange activity called channeling, which I was into. He used the same self-hypnosis technique used by Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet at Virginia Beach. When Elwood was in trance, he spoke out loud as any other long-past entities. Freaky stuff when you don't understand it. I bolted to the bookstore. I bought one and I read it all night. Next day, I went next door and said, "Jane, how would you like to be hypnotized?" "Of course," she said, delighted. I told her absolutely nothing else except that she would be asleep, and she struggled to the couch. Now, before I tell the rest of this tale, I admit I was not ignorant of this Shirley MacLaine type spiritual concept and not afraid of it as a project. I was a hypnotist all my life. I spent many years doing it. I started it when I was teaching in high school. I did it in college and in the Marine Corps. So it was not new to me, and it was nothing I'd be afraid of. And I also had read every ancient book available in spiritual libraries, except for the ones hidden in the Vatican. I immersed myself in New Age, Corsia, Asian religions, Masonic, cults, you name it, I read it. I read everything and anything. I was always curious about God, so I was not ignorant in that particular moment in time. During our first few hypnotic sessions, I relaxed her and started taking her back slowly in age regression to a time when she could actually walk at age 12, and also in the hypnotic dreams. I had her do strenuous physical exercise that helped the circulation in her legs and the circulation below her waist, although she never moved a twitch while in trance. She and her doctor both loved the results. He wanted me to write an article for a medical journal describing the healing process. One time when she awoke, she felt so good she actually swung her legs over onto the floor and tried to stand up, never even thinking she couldn't stand. She had no strength below her waist. Nothing below her waist ever worked, and the disappointment on her face gave me a tremendous idea. Screw it. Let's go to a past life when she knew she could walk and see if she can move her legs in a trance. Eventually, under hypnosis in another life, on local public television, she kicked her legs into the air on live television. The entire TV staff gasped. We agreed to record each past life session like the shrink did in the book that Elwood suggested I read. I was excited, so was she. Next day, we launched. As my usual introductory process, I saw her body let go and she was sound asleep. So I gave it a shot. I said, "Okay, Jane, go directly to a past life where you and I served together." There was a long silence. I was white-knuckled on the arms of the chair, waiting. Suddenly, a casual voice, the most beautiful I have ever heard, said, "I'm Clearwater," in a high, lilting, sweet-sounding American Indian feminine accent. It totally blew me away. It was the first lifetime she remembered where we served together in a primitive and unknown Native American village somewhere in North America. She was my adopted daughter, and I was the chief, and she remembered it while she was totally out cold. In the next day's session, she immediately went to another life as my mother in Japan in the 1600s, where I was a well-known martial artist specialist and was the shogun's chief instructor for samurai. I glanced at the trophy sitting proudly on the mantle as she spoke about the samurai experience, and so it went, on and on, sharing our lives together between us for many, many years in all kinds of different roles. We had served together many, many times. Actually, it turned out, and I didn't write this in the book, it turns out she actually came to that current life and took that chair voluntarily just to meet up with me, just to help us do our mission together. We all do this with our friends. Don't think these are casual agreements. I assure you, she had absolutely no memory of these sessions when she awoke, either slowly or by surprise. I tested her fiercely to see how she got her information when in trance, and I never told her my plan in advance before any session, so she never knew what I was going to do while she was asleep. One day, by total surprise, a master came through. I had no idea what was happening and was told to be still and listen. I did. I was given the answers to questions I begged to know for years. When I was in the other side, when I had the near-death experience, and I was unconscious up in Caprivi, I asked the teachers on the other side the exact same type questions, and the answers were exactly the same. And I'm telling you, this is the truth. I let her listen to a few of the tapes eventually so she could hear how many different voices and different accents, an absolutely, totally unimitatable voice of a master. She laughed at the different, difficult to imitate vocal accents and the syntax of the sounds coming from her own mouth. I eventually wrote and published a book about it called Going for Gold. It was the beginning, at least the first half of this. It was awful. I took quite a bit of crap from my family, my sunshine friends, and foes alike. He's crazy. He talks to ghosts. Today, channeling and reincarnation therapy is considered mainstream everywhere. But I was the odd man out in the old days in the 1980s, and my family and friends rejected me brutally. And by doing so, they declared their own personal bias and palpable ignorance. I finally had just about enough of everybody's critical horseshit. I quit practicing law, and I quit everything else. I planned my escape from my marriage. It took a few years, but it worked. And in 1994, I landed in Windhoek, Namibia. So that's the story about my friend Jane. When I left for Africa, I promised her faithfully she would never die alone in that ratty old house. No old lady's home for her either, not my friend Jane. Somehow, she found me everywhere I went in Africa. When I was near a phone, she always called me on Monday nights, and we did the same hypnotic therapy on the phone, long distance. I never admitted that particular fact I just read to you to a single soul until these words were typed. One Monday night in our flat in Swakop, a neighbor called me from Delaware. Jane fell. She's in the Wilmington Hospital. I arrived late Thursday night in the Philly airport, found a secret place under the flower pot out front of the not-so-secret key, and I slept on the couch. Next morning, I went to the hospital to see Jane. I'm still amazed at what I did. I must have been totally and completely nuts. The next is chapter 63.